Hello to all of you. Um, Many of you I know, of course. Um, Thank you for coming and to be so courageous to make the time for this talk. And I know when you're there that this is anyway with a very big open mind and ready to go deep into some items. And before I forget, I have to tell you, you can always ask questions. There is a possibility for the chat to type some questions. I will try to answer them at the end, unless there is a reason to ask more quickly. But anyway, Veronica will follow up for the questions. So my name is Edwin Karser. I was originally a dentist. I had a very nice, successful practice. I love my job a lot. At a certain moment, I felt that I needed something else, and also the people needed something else. I wanted to help more. I wanted to help better. And I evolved into the biological dentistry. It was a more wide, more open approach, more medically based. And I evolved also towards a medical healer. I did electroacupuncture, I did homeopathy, phytotherapy, food supplements. And during this work, I realized that there was a very big impact on people when I was talking about their illnesses, but also about their problems. And that's why I wanted to go even further. And I transformed my work into an even larger work that I will explain today for a little part. And so you can see I was focused on mind-body consciousness. And in 2010, I created neuroscience with my son, that is a doctor in the neuropsychology, and my wife, Fabienne, at that time. And we created, let's say, neuroscience, like you see here, that is science, psychology, and neuropsychology. And at that time, I also found the Float and Life tool, and the Float and Life tool today will be an important part in this webinar. But a little bit more about my life in 2016. So my wife died with a bomb attack at the airport in Brussels. By consequence, I had this great attention from press and journalists over the whole world. I also made a song for Fabienne. You see me here in the studio recording the song. And I was lucky to have near me at that time the drummer of Simple Minds that could coach me a bit with my song. Here you see the CD of my song. You see me talking at the King's Palace, where they asked me to give a conference about my philosophy. And here you see that I sang this song for Fabienne before the crowd. And up at the left, you see me live on the news with my daughter. You see here the Float and Life tool, well, different ones. And the purpose of the Float and Life tool is, of course, to help people to gain insight about themselves. I will give some education courses about the tool, and these courses have different hatches, different approaches. You see them here: medical, scientific, psychological, and philosophical. And each hatch has different items. For example, the medical hatch has this psychosomatology, the medical basis, the hormonal basis, vibrational medicine, by chemical basis, what we call systemic basis in medical terms, organ functions, and healing methods. Well, you need really for a good background to work as a Freudian therapist, to have this basis. And today, specifically, we will talk about neurological foundations. But a little bit more about the Photon Life tool before we start. I created this in 2009. And I wanted to have a kind of mirror for the people to look to themselves, to learn about themselves. And you see that on the Photon Life tool, you have 4 sides. One side is the body. Another side is the levels of consciousness. The third side are resonances. And the fourth side are illusions. I realize that you don't have it at your home, you don't have it close to you, so that's a bit the difficulty to work online. But I hope with the pictures that I prepared that yeah, you can follow a bit today. So what will you learn by the end of this webinar? We will learn that there is one approach that can be the same for trauma, dysfunctions, blockages, and obstacles. You will also learn how does the brain manage to have access to higher consciousness, and also what are emotions and how we can deal with them. And then, as we were talking about the happiness process in the introduction on Facebook and on the blog, the purpose is to bring heaven on earth and not in the opposite, not try to manipulate earth to obtain heaven. And at the end of the session, there is foreseen a little gift, and I hope you will be happy with it. Well, we are somewhere happy in this period on earth to be in contact of an enormous amount of information. It can be useful, but sometimes it can be also very overwhelming. And it's very important, I think, to use all this information in an effective way. Basically, an effective way is not to get involved in too much chaos. And so I propose with my approach to move from direction to dimension. I will explain what it means, but maybe you can understand more easily from fragmentation to one perception. So if you don't want to be confused with all this information, one perception that contains everything from life should carry all the rest. And I will show you that the brain, in fact, is made for this. Let's try to make it a little bit more concrete. If you see dysfunction, mental dysfunctions, for example, are depression, anxiety disorders, like also stress disorders, not being able to contain stress and to react in a nice way, addictive behaviors, sleep disorders, burnout, we all know, mood disorders, personality disorders, and possibly also physical disorders that we know, I think, about thyroid disorders, the most common one, I think so. And so these dysfunctions, scientists found that there were 2 main reasons for these functions. The first is a lack of consistent caregiver. So as a child, if you have chronic misattunements, in fact, misattunements, what it is, it's another word to say that there are a lot of lies around you. So dependent on education, incoherent information, it brings a kind of mental abuse, a lack of security. And so if you have this lack of secure early attachments, you will have some dysfunctions. The second reason, essentially, is a lack of connection with what is. And I will talk about that today because it's indeed very important from childhood to have connection with reality, with what is real. I will pass very fast on this slide, but this is somewhere interesting because it's also done by scientists that say that there is a kind of vicious circle with confrontation with problem, that brings stress, and people don't know how to handle with this confrontation and with this stress. And in this vicious circle, I would just like you to look at this one, a lack of restorative experience. So that this is a key to break the circle, the vicious circle of getting more and more in dysfunction. And just remind this and just memorize this, because I will talk about it later. So lack of restorative experience makes that there is no possibility for healing. And if we do psychotherapy with an ego basis, it means that we give too much value to the ego, there will be no emotional arousal management. And if there is no management of emotion, there is also no cognitive behavioral therapy possible. If you want to check it, these are the people that did this scientific research. But I come back to this restorative experience. Now, I was I did restorative dentistry. It's a bit the same. You have a tooth that has been damaged and you have to repair. Well, in this case, it's about restorative experience on the mind. And it's very important if we want to heal dysfunctions. And dysfunctions can be little dysfunction. We all have these dysfunctions. It's not that that is necessarily a trauma, but it can be also just a little blockage. And to heal this, there is a need of accumulation of common sense experience and affection. So it's not just only one stimulation, it's really an accumulation that you need of common sense experience. And for me, in my approach, I see really two pillars for this restorative experience. And one is truth, and the other is neuroregulation. Now, truth is then, let's say, more, so the mental aspect, and neuroregulation is then more the physical aspect. But I will show you that they really go together very well. Let's talk about emotions. If we want to have this restorative experience, for me, I think it's very important to realize what emotions are, because I see that the word emotion is a bit abused, well, very much abused, in fact. Emotions is used for anything, for every kind of feeling on every kind of level of consciousness, and that is never. And I want to explain this. I was very lucky to work with Michael Dalili, that was a specialist in emotions, and also neuropsychologist. And he worked also with Paul Ekman. And these people said something that I like a lot, and that is that emotions, you could say that there is a facial expression that is very specific to emotions. In other words, with emotions, there is a facial expression that you find in the whole world. So in every culture, there is, for fear, for example, the same facial expression, for disgust also. And even, and that's even stronger, the blind people also have this expression, facial expression. And so we can define them as emotions, because for the other feelings, there is not or no facial expression, or even not the same. So let's talk about fear. We know all what fear is. I think if we look at the virus, how important the aspect of fear has become. Fear of having the virus, but also fear of dying, fear of not having enough in life, and so fear of having not enough money. You all know this. Now, disgust is another emotion. Disgust, we know, unfortunately, when we see, for example, a terrorist that kills or behead a victim, it's really disgusting, and we see yeah, quite a lot, even in movies, really disgusting things, and the facial expression is very clear with disgust, and I can feel it when I feel it. Then there is anger. Anger, well, we can of course be very angry because someone takes something from us, when we get stolen, or even when there is someone killed that we like. And we can be very sad of this. We can be sad of all these stupid things that people do. We can be sad because we cannot do something about it. Then astonishment. Well, astonishment, I would like to precise that in fact, originally, it was more agreed that it would be the word surprise that would be used, but in the end, astonishment is a better word. I'll give you an example that I had here in my practice. It was that a man told me that suddenly his wife said, you know what? I would like to make love in you in public. And the man said, what? And it was really not good. It was really shocked. And that is really a good example for astonishment. It can be very painful to receive this. And then another emotion is happiness, excitement. Now, again, originally, this was mixed up with joy. And I want to explain how I see it, because happiness and excitement is, of course, nice if it can be unconditional. And excitement, for example, is rarely unconditional. I give you my example why I was preparing this webinar. I was so enthusiastic and so excited that I had suddenly a lower back pain. And I had to tell to myself, okay, I know from it comes, it's an emotion. It's not good for my body. Okay, I have to get back to myself. I stopped a bit. I went to sit down, and I realized what the problem was, and the pain was immediately gone. So this all to tell you that the feature of emotions, they are not so interesting because they ask energy from you. They take energy from you. They are variable, unstable. They are exhausting. They are temporary. They are involuntary, so they come and they go, but when they come, you cannot stop them. They are overwhelming. They are much too strong, and they are conditional. So maybe there would be something more interesting than these emotions. Not that I condemn, emotions, not that I say that you cannot have them. What I want to say is that you really need to be conscious of them, because if you are conscious of them, you can work with them. But if you don't realize what you're doing, you get stuck and you get too much involved in it, and you cannot play with them, because emotions can be okay, of course. If you see the Float Alive tool, now this picture, you see the second level. I hope you can see my arrow moving. You see on the second level of consciousness, these emotions. And you see also on the same level, the pain. And like I said, emotions are giving pain. They're painful. They're usually, well, I say nearly always, taking your energy and not so nice. And even what they call positive emotions can be, in fact, just a polarization of positive and negative. I will come back to that very soon. And you see also on the second level, feelings. Okay, try to remember this because it comes back in the next slides. Here you see some brain scans. In fact, you see fMRI. It's functional magnetic resonance imaging. And you see the right side, and scientists have measured that there is more activity shown on the right side, on the fMRI, when there is disgust, fear, isolated person, timid person, depressed person, avoidant person. You know that in the beginning we had these scans, but we couldn't see the function, the moving of or the energy coming, the activity coming in the brain. Now we can see, because we can put a kind of magnetism into the cells and into the brain, and we can see the functioning of certain zones, and that's why we know that there is more activity with these kind of emotions. And then they say in the left side, there is more activity when someone is sociable, enthusiastic, active, when there is happiness, and they call this positive emotions. Now, that's where I don't agree. Now, I'll explain you why. I first have to tell you that this is the cortex, the neocortex. You see the neocortex. This is cerebellum. That is the primitive brain, you can say. This is the primitive brain is when you have these stimulations that you don't have to think about, what goes by itself. And this part is the cerebrum, and this is the more conscious part. But the external part that you can see here on the picture is the neocortex. Now, we come back to here. These are the positive emotions, they say, but as I told you, I don't agree about that. And I'll explain why. It would be a huge mistake from universal consciousness to judge itself on its own creation. It's like when people would say, my right arm is better to write, so we have to bind the left arm to avoid to work, because the right arm is a good arm and the left arm is a bad arm. Well, we cannot say this for the brain. We could not say there is a good side of the brain and a bad side of the brain. It would not be logic at all. So I want to transform this into another concept. And I would say that if you take emotions to be not negative or positive, but they are exhausting, they take energy, and you could transform it to feelings, that would bring us to a kind of insight about how we work. And if you see here, I put some balanced situations where feelings can be useful, and you will immediately realize that it's much more easy to identify with the emotions than with the feelings that are balanced. Why? Because we are programmed to create problems. And if we have balanced, neutral vision on things, it's more difficult to get into it. If you see, for example, balance between drive and alertness, well, it seems not to be so concrete. Balance between meditation and activity, also not, and it's a good feeling. Balance between humility and unconditional joy. Well, in these kind of feelings, if you go into it, and we cannot do it now, but it's a work we can do bit by bit, it's a kind of meditation effect, then you will feel connected. And we are coming bit by bit to this, that in fact, real joy, real love is a feeling, and it's a feeling to be connected to reality. And if you remember, we said that if there is dysfunctions, it can be healed by connecting to truth, to reality. So I want to come back to this, that there is not a male and a female brain side, because that is a myth. What is true is that women are more emotional active on both sides. And that is, of course, an interesting item, because women can be very strong in these emotional, and by strong I mean effective and very beautiful. Okay, so we have this slide now, and I will have to take some time to explain this, because I have to take the Frogton Life tool here, well, to show you. You see here on the Frogton Life tool the 3 lower levels of consciousness. You can see humankind, the consciousness of plants and animals, and earth and stone. Well, these 3 I've represented here. You see? So this is a level 1, this is level 2, and this is level 3. If you look on the side of the organs, then you can see that it corresponds to the lower intestine. So you can have digestion problems, for example, if you have fear. That seems to be quite well known. Sorry, I come back. Yeah. Or, like I said, you can have lower back pain, like when you get too much excited, like it was in my case. I prepared the webinar. And let me take an example, concrete example about sin. When there is sin, what happens when there is sin? You feel that you have a possibility to fail, because sin demands kind of conditions, you know? And when you fail, you get stuck in, I say, a crystallized conditioning. It's symbolized by the stone. What is the stone? The stone on all levels of consciousness on the Frozen Life Tool is a symbol of a crystallized conditioning. So you can have a conditioning that is more free, but you know that it's a conditioning, so you're not so much stuck into it because you are conscious of it. It's like when you're conscious of your emotions, you don't give it really so much value, so you don't get stuck in it. But if you identify too much with your emotions, you can crystallize it and you get stuck in the kind of very heavy conviction of the importance of the emotion, or in this case, the importance of realizing what they ask from you. And if you don't realize it, you're in a sin. So this is a balance in the middle on every level. And this is a deviation of conditioning. Well, if we see on the second level, you have this deviation, you can project, anyway, you will project this deviation into the lower levels, because that's how we work. We work like this on physical basis, but also psychologically. The higher is mastering, is directing the lower. So if you have this failing illusion, then you will have to compensate because I'll give you a very concrete example. When they built the cathedrals, you know that the priest or the archbishop, I think it's called, they built the cathedral with money from people. And when they didn't have money enough, they invented a kind of very tricky thing. They said, okay, you can come to the church and you can touch a reliquary. And if you touch the reliquary, it's, for example, a bit of skull of a saint. If you can touch this, well, all your sins will be forgiven. The thing is, if you touch it, you have to pay. So in this fear for survival, they get money out of it. So this is an example how it works. If you have here a kind of deviation on the second level, it will be projected to the first level. And in this case, in this example, it's about money. I could give many other examples, but I will stick to this one only for today. Just to say that, of course, when you have this sin concept, well, it has also to be controlled or directed by a heaven concept. For example, heaven is, God is someone with a big beard, this person that keeps an eye on you, and so these things, what they told people. And then, of course, you have a whole story and you get stuck in the 3 lower levels of consciousness. And so the next step I want to tell you is that you don't need necessarily to get stuck in these levels. If you know that, if you realize that, then you will be ready to just step 1 level higher. So, and if you go 1 level higher on the Frozen Life Tool, where do you come? You come into the realizing of the illusion that there is a division between observer and observed. You can read it here. So this is an illusion. Well, if you realize that it is an illusion, then you go into the heart of your being. And probably if you have listened to Morji or to other wise people like Eckhart Tolle, White Bull, Deepak Chopra, and so the talk about non-duality science, they will all tell you, go into your heart. And it doesn't mean that you have to go into your physical heart, of course. It means that you have to go to this level of consciousness where there is a heart feeling. And the heart feeling means that there is no division anymore between the observer and the observed. So the conclusion is then, let the whole regulate the low. And in that sense, love is the only real power. The only thing you have to do is allow it. Okay, but what is love? That's of course a big question. But let me finish first. Love is the only real power. If there is resistance, it will have to be brought back to you. I mean, the love will be brought back to you by suffering. And that is feedback. I'll explain this with this picture of the Floating Life tool. I hope it's not too difficult for you until now. And of course, please ask questions if something is not clear. And I'll come back to it at the end of the webinar. Well, you have this concept, probably you heard about it from wise people, this concept, I am. I am is in fact the basic feeling, the basic consciousness level, because everyone has it. Everyone has this I am feeling. Yes. And this I am then can be brought or reflected into life. It can be reflected into life in balance, like you see here in the middle of every level of consciousness, but it can also be reflected with some resistance, and then there is a deviation from a certain moment, and that is even from the sixth level of consciousness into the lower. Now, I will try to illustrate this with the neocortex. Okay, this is a little bit, even for me, a little bit technical, but I have to say this, what the scientists say about the neocortex. The neocortex is a perception and the abstract thinking. It receives feedback of conscious movement, language, and reasoning that allows it to adapt, to remodel. So it's very important that you know that there is a possibility to remodel. So in the neocortex, now you're not necessarily stuck. And so the neocortex is the organ that is reflecting freedom into your life, bringing true joy. And more about the neocortex. I read this because I also had to learn from other scientists. The neocortex consists of 6 different layers between which there are no clear boundaries. That's very interesting because the absence of boundaries determines the absence of fragmented perception. See, if there would be very clear boundaries, then we would talk about fragmentation. But as I say in the beginning, real insight, real consciousness, pure consciousness is a movement from direction to dimension, from fragmentation to oneness. And the neocortex has these 6 layers, but they are not so, the border, the difference between the layers is not defined really. And so it's a part of us that chooses for freedom. Given that freedom can be associated with the greatest possible potential of an individual, we might ask ourselves whether it would not be most efficient if we let our lives run from there. And that's what I propose, to let our lives run from the higher consciousness. when you see the body, you see that the neocortex is on this 7th layer of consciousness. And so we could run our life from there. And the good news also, I told you about the heart consciousness, that division between observer and observed is an illusion. So there is in fact no division. That's heart energy. So it means like, I am not more important than you, something like that, in fact. And there is a direct connection between the neocortex and the heart. That's impressive. Scientists found that there was also a neural control. There was like a nervous system that is very similar to the neurons of the neocortex, and we can find them in the heart. You can find this on internet if you're interested to know more about it. And so it means that if we can use this higher energy to bring it to the lower, there are some consequences for our well-being, for happiness. On the contrary, tensions or conflicts come when we don't use this brain-heart connection. And instead, we use the connection between the 6th level, what is the belief, and the third was what is a will. So if we are focused on, I believe this, and by consequence, I want this, then we get in another energy. We don't get really connected with love energy. And so resisting love brings fear then in that case. If you see at the left, we have what love brings. It brings a releasing of dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, and growth hormone. And if we have fear, we release other substances like cortisol, norepinephrine, what is noradrenaline, cytokines and histamines. And we see then that these are secreted by the organs that are corresponding to the lower levels of consciousness, like the adrenal glands. Okay, so I want to illustrate it again with the brain, that ignorance starts by identification with the person. Now, you see that Descartes already knew this because he said the epiphysis is the seat of the soul. Well, the soul is difficult to define. So in fact, I would say that the epiphysis is the transition from the soul and the freedom that is linked to the soul into the person, into personality. So the epiphysis is in fact the seat of the personality. I like this more because the soul is very difficult to define. So you see the neocortex again, and it is in fact as if this wide range of information can be assimilated and used to get into your body, because everything from the brain in fact goes into your spinal cord. So can you imagine how much information is brought into the body? But it has a kind of technique, that the brain has the kind of technique to bring all the information also to be selected by this pineal gland, what is epiphysis. See, and it's like I can illustrate the best with this parachute. This parachute itself, you can see as the neocortex, and you come from heaven, from above, and this all information will be kind of brought into the little man here, the little person. And while you come from high and while you come from heaven and go down, you really have the impression that you're free, because you didn't touch the ground yet. So you have no responsibility. You can do nothing. You cannot go to action. So you're kind of floating freely. It's then that you are in between between the freedom and between the personality, being a person. And as soon as you touch the ground, then of course you get identified. You have to get to action. You have to take decisions. And the real connection, the real happiness is not to be too much involved when you touch the ground, and to be at any time connected with this freedom and this whole information of the neocortex that is brought to you. I come back to Descartes. He said, "Je pense donc je suis." I don't agree totally with this, because I would say in that case, "Je m'identifie donc je suis." So I'm getting identified, because you touch the ground and then you say, okay, now I am here. And this I am is getting identified. And so if he's too much identified, you need some new glasses, so that the third eye can be used to relativate. So it's nearly the end of the webinar, and I can come to my conclusions. And I can say that we conclude that you can't solve a problem within the same layer. So you cannot solve a problem when you stay into this conditioning solved by another conditioning within the same layer. In fact, you just swing from one conditioning to another, struggling with it. The second conclusion is the body and the brain are made to bring heaven on earth. So we are just made to be happy. We are made to be joyful. I don't have to use anymore this happiness word if it is in contradictory to unhappiness. But let's say the body is made for us to be joyful and to stay joyful, as long as we stay connected to also the higher level of consciousness. And then also the false image of who you are is what brings suffering and disease. So if you get connected to earthly levels, still with relativating the image of yourself, you can avoid suffering and avoid diseases. Also, there is no fixed duality in the neocortex. I talked about that. There is no fixed duality in the neocortex, nor in the sides of the brain, left side or right side, good or bad. Then an advice, keep your feelings pure. Don't go too much in emotions thinking that it's useful. Try to keep the feelings pure. Then don't give power to emotions. Be conscious of them. Don't say it's bad, but be conscious of them. Be conscious of what they mean. Second level of consciousness. I told you I had a gift for you at the end of the webinar. Well, I'll tell you something about these Proton Life tools that I made myself. So I'm making, it's a kind of piece of art. In fact, they're all different. Normally now I make them for 350 euros, and you can have 10% reduction. And you can also have the guidance, the book, in fact, that you see here with the Proton Life tool. We also give a certificate, because I signed a certificate telling that it's a unique piece of art. I think we will maybe in the future try to make it more industrial, because I will not be able to make them all by myself. So take the opportunity to buy one now, and probably it will be worth much more in the future if it has the success that I think it will have. You can also choose for one live coaching session for free, because you followed this webinar. Or you can have a free education course. I told you that the purpose of my work was to make that many people use it, because we will not be able to do a lot of things if I'm alone. One man is nothing, and I'm nothing without you. We need in this time to try to bring more peace in Earth and with people, and we have to do this together. Absolutely. Here you see that there are different Float on Life tools with different colors. You can choose your color. You can choose your language also. You can choose the kind of varnish if you want it to be very shiny or not. And you can even choose a finition because as you see here, sometimes the layers are more clearly defined because I paint them. And the circles also can be painted or not. It's like you wish. And if you want to buy one, the best is that you come and get it here, or I can bring it if you're not living too far. But if I have to send it, it's quite heavy. I made it very strong, so you can handle it without breaking it. And if I have to send it, yeah, it's very difficult. Keep in touch. Go on the site enlightenmentcommunity.org. Go on my YouTube channel. Look at the videos. I have quite a lot of videos now, and I will add some also. Go on my Instagram, my Facebook page. Ask me questions. Subscribe to the newsletter. You can write me a mail. If after the webinar you have some other questions, please don't hesitate to write me. Tell me what you think. I like the feedback. Don't forget, we're all together in this. And if you have something you want to talk about, then of course, also very welcome.